Today on Pro Church Daily, we share the reason that 8% of millennials describe as why they've stopped attending church.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Daily, the show where in 10 minutes or less, you'll get your daily dose of tips and tactics to help your church share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift we've seen in the last 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills. I'm joined as always by the boss man. It's Brady Shearer.
Heyo!
And today, this is the reason that 8% of millennials say that they don't attend church.
I think there's a common misconception with millennials, especially amongst older individuals, generalizing,
Okay.
that millennials don't come to church because church just isn't relevant enough to them when it comes to it's just not cool enough.
Yeah.
You know, if we had better stage design,
You need more lights.
if our lights were a little darker,
It's not hazy enough in here.
if the fog was a little foggier,
Can we turn this music up?
if the music was a little more ear-splittingly loud.
Look, this coffee is second wave. I need third wave.
This coffee is not single origin. I spit it out. Is it lukewarm? No, but I still spit it out. This is an amazing book I'm holding up right now. It's called Making Space for Millennials by Barna. Page 40 of this book, it did a study on millennials, and they asked millennials, why do you not attend church? Only 8% of respondents said they did not attend church because it was out of date. So only, not even, 1 out of 10 millennials is choosing not to attend church because it's just not cool enough and it's so outdated, it's too old school. That's not really a primary reason. No. So I think what we need to do is just throw out that idea that if we had better stage design, if our coffee was single origin, if we could just get a little hazier, foggy and hazier into phasey. If we just phase it up in here, that's how we could get the millennials. Millennials are saying, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
So this, of course, begs the question, what are millennials saying? The number one reason that millennials are not attending church, according to page 40 of this book and the research Barna did, is that millennials are saying, I find God elsewhere. 39% of respondents said that.
Wow.
So about 2 in every 5 millennials is saying, I find God elsewhere, and that's why I no longer attend church.
Wow.
And the reason this is happening is because most of our churches, although we might say circles are better than rows, what we really value are 4 songs and a message. And we know this is what we really value because the majority of our creative, volunteer, budget, and time resources are being put into the 1-hour Sunday service. The problem with this little device I'm holding in my hand right now, a mobile device, is that I can listen to messages that are way better than your pastor and music that is way better than your worship team for free at all times. And so the commodity of listening to a message and music has become pretty much commoditized everywhere. It is easy to find. And you might push back and say, well, our worship is unique to us and it's anointed. Well, you just, I get it, but you're still singing oceans. And our message from our pastor is unique. And that's true, but at the end of the day, every message is, speaking from the Bible, and God, the Bible can speak in any number of ways, and it's not really hindered by your specific application to your community. The Lord works through all of this. And so to say that that's the commodity that we want to dial into, millennials are saying, hey, we're finding it elsewhere. Now, I get it. You might think that's stupid, and you might not like it, and that is entirely your right. At the end of the day, the senior leadership in our churches, on average, in the Protestant world, is led by a 54-year-old person. And the biggest generation right now in the world, largest cohort in the American workforce, largest voting group in this next upcoming election is millennials. So there's a huge divide between who's leading our churches and the majority who's populating our communities. And so we have to recognize that that divide is going to lead to disagreements. And when you are a way younger or way older than another individual, there are going to be some generational gaps. So you, as an older individual, are completely entitled to look at millennials and call them entitled. But when you do that, you have to recognize that you are kind of, in many ways, disqualifying yourself from the table in the conversation with millennials. You cannot say, millennials are dumb. Why do they do these things? I disagree with all of them. And then say, we just got to reach these millennials. Because there's a fundamental disagreement between what you believe and what you want to accomplish. And it's very difficult for you to say, I think going to the gym is the dumbest thing and it will lead to no good. And then say, I'm going to start a gym regimen. You might be able to get through it for a week, but you're going to get real mad at that barbell on an early Monday morning when you're like, I don't even think this is the right thing. Screw millennials and screw the gym. it's very difficult to believe one thing and act in complete disagreement with that belief. It's just not sustainable long term. So you can totally believe that millennials are dumb and that they should not think they can find God elsewhere because they need to be living in community. But if you want to reach them, you kind of have to just say, okay, it's not what I think, it's what they think. If I want to reach them, I need to be welcomed into the conversation, and that requires humbly asking questions. Otherwise, you just have to say, yeah, I just don't want to reach them.
Yeah, and if I'm going to try and reach them, what the data suggests here is that it's not the lights, it's not the music, it's not the coffee, all of these things that it seems for the last handful of years, churches have just like actively pursued in the pursuit of attracting millennials. If that's how you're doing it, this data suggests you're missing the mark for the vast majority of millennials and what they're looking for and what they need out of a spiritual community.
And if millennials are saying that I find God elsewhere, at first glance, we can get really discouraged by that, right? They're not finding it in church. But the reason for this is because we as churches, I don't believe, have begun to mobilize using the digital platforms that exist for us in the ways that we can and should. I'm meeting God elsewhere. Guess where elsewhere is? It's online.
Yeah.
It's through digital devices. Just because your church allocates the majority of its resources to that 1 hour a week doesn't mean that that's the best way to accomplish your mission and vision statement. We talked about this in the past. Every single church's mission or vision statement can be distilled down to the greatest commandment, love God, love others, or the Great Commission, make disciples. At the end of the day, every single one of our churches is trying to equip people to love God, love others, and make disciples. We, for the longest time, have decided that the 1 hour Sunday service is the best way to accomplish that. But we are now living through, as we start off every single episode of Pro Church Daily saying, the single biggest communication shift in the last 500 years since the printing press. I now would say that the best way to make disciples, help people to love God and love others, is not a single 1 hour service where you listen to music and listen to a message.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that gathering in person is unnecessary.
Of course.
Highly necessary.
Yeah.
But we are not having a problem under-indexing meeting in person on Sundays. That's where we spend every money and every time that we have. We do that already. What we don't do is take advantage, seize the 167 of those other 167 hours where millennials are meeting God elsewhere. You can create the content. How many pieces of content have we done? The one that comes to mind is the YouTube strategy. You could create content that millennials interact with.
Yeah.
Do you know how much people watch YouTube? They watch all of it.
Too much.
Nonstop.
Yeah.
Every single kid wants to be a YouTuber now because they grow up watching YouTube. The amount of content that our churches could create, helping people to love God, love others, and make disciples through YouTube content. My daughter's watching Peppa every single day, and she could be watching, the child's Bible thing, and that probably exists and reflects more on me as a parent than the churches who are creating the content. But
yeah, and I think this begins a very interesting conversation that we can't have in 10 minutes or less, and maybe we'll have to pick it up another way in another time. But I'm going to put my pastor hat on for a second.
Oh no.
I know, and hearing these numbers and hearing that for 39% of millennials?
Yes.
So the biggest group reflected in this study, the reason they're not coming to church is because they're finding God elsewhere. So that means that the inverse is true. They're not finding God in church.
Facts.
And for what you said about church, we've commoditized it and turned it into gather and listen to us, sing songs, sit down and listen to us, say things about the Bible. And what's so interesting about the history of our faith is that historically, God's people never gathered around a sermon, but they gathered around the presence. And so and the presence of God. And so if millennials aren't coming to our church because they're finding God elsewhere and not finding it in the church, maybe as churches and maybe with that 1 hour service and then also with those 167 other hours during the week, we shift our perspective and say, okay, how can we facilitate an encounter with God? Right? And so maybe it doesn't look like the way church has looked like for the few decades anymore. Maybe we begin to shift our philosophies. Maybe our Sunday meetings begin to look a little different. Maybe our social media accounts begin to look a little different because instead of focusing, like you said, all of our time, energy, and money in putting on a great musical show and a dialogue, we actually shift our philosophy and say, okay, how can we facilitate an encounter with God? We can gather around the presence as opposed to gathering around a sermon. And like I said, I just opened a huge can of worms, and Pastor Alexander apologizes for that. But maybe this is a conversation we can continue some other time, some other way.
I think we always see this monumental shift where we swing from one extreme to the other.
Oh, yeah, it's the classic pendulum.
And I think what you just hit on is true. We need to seize the 167, and we also need to reevaluate what we're doing in that other 1 hour of the week. We got to reevaluate the whole thing. And I understand there are people listening and watching this right now. They're going, I don't care if millennials are not encountering God at church. Everyone else is. Why don't they just do things the way we used to?
Right.
That type of thinking is why public transportation and taxi cabs got messed up by Uber and Lyft. That's the type of thinking that got all the hotels messed up because Airbnb came in.
Right.
That's the type of thinking that messed up every single music record label when iTunes and Spotify messed that all up.
Right.
Movie theaters did not adjust. Netflix messed them all up.
Yeah.
If you don't reconsider and evaluate how you're doing things while living through a monumental communication shift, you get left behind.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing to dismiss it. You're totally entitled to do that. But I think we have to look at history and look at all the other shifts that are happening across every other industry and acknowledge that we are not immune as churches. We need to adjust and evaluate. Even if we think that the way we used to do it is the better way,
Yeah.
make church great again, maybe we can evaluate and move forward and progress because the world is progressing all around us. And if we don't progress with it, maybe our church is the next one to close its doors.
Right, and the message can stay the same. The message has to stay the same. It's the gospel, right? But the method is what I think we need to look at and evaluate and maybe consider evolving.
That'll do it for today's episode of Pro Church Daily. We'll see you tomorrow. Hey, thanks for watching today's episode of Pro Church Daily. Make sure to subscribe to the Pro Church Tools channel so you never miss another video.
And if you like this video, why don't you go ahead and smash the like button?
Smash it! See you tomorrow.